Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. Now, this is the weekly chart of palladium with a cross with silver. And you can see that we got a breakout with palladium here. This is not new all-time highs, but it is new highs above the most recent high in 2011 and everything but the spike top high that we had in 2001. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with the palladium market, but this had to do with a switch by U.S. automakers to use palladium instead of platinum. Those are pretty much interchangeable for catalytic converters, and there was a big squeeze that happened. So we'll ignore this. Something like that could be happening again, maybe, if we look back here, but probably not. This was actually a supply and demand driven thing. But if we look at since that time, you can see starting in 2003 when silver started its first rally, and palladium pretty much went, you can see, in lockstep with it, very, very close. It's not until we get to about the beginning of 2013 that we get this big divergence where we can see silver consistently falling and palladium turning around and rising. So now if we look just at the palladium chart itself, we can see that that's clearly a breakout into new highs. Now it's not sustained yet, but you can see that let's get in here a little bit closer so we can see that it did touch into a higher level than it has. So it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes from here. Now I want to cover some of the news stories. A big one that we had here, of course, is going to be the Eric Cantor being tossed out of office, which is kind of interesting because both Tea Party people and Democrats are celebrating that. It really doesn't mean too much. I think in the long term, that it's kind of surprising to me. It's a late effort to stop the horse that's out of the barn. So far that there's no hope. But before we do that, I want to look at a story that kind of gives you an idea of the type of people that we're dealing with here with these House Republicans. So these are people who don't really believe in anything except enriching themselves. That's the only way you can describe it, because if conservatives or Republicans stand for anything, they would stand for reducing the size of government and standing for free markets and against corruption and cronyism and stuff like that. And they obviously don't stand for that. They stand for exactly the opposite. And here's the list of Republicans who actually voted for this bill. Now, what's going on here is this fight here with Norwegian Airlines. And what Norwegian Air International is trying to do is they're trying to offer low-cost flights. And I didn't find the original story that I read on this, but it had a lot of statements from people who'd actually flown there. One gentleman had gotten a flight, I believe, from New York to Oslo for $280 for a one-way trip. So we're talking about significantly discounted flights here. And the Democrats and the unions are fighting it. It's very interesting because they're fighting against a socialist country. Now, they're going to say that it's not fair, but we can see here that the United States is starting to stand for everything bad. And let's read a little bit of this. And this is from CEI.org, which is a free market organization. I previously wrote about the campaign from the Airline Pilots Association, ALPA, against Norwegian Air International's attempt to offer low-cost flights from the U.S. to Europe. Having lost their case in Europe, ALPA has teamed up with a European pilots union to pressure the Federal Aviation Administration to deny NAI's petition for a foreign air carrier permit. In addition, ALPA is spending millions on a xenophobic ad campaign in a pathetic attempt to stoke ethnic and national division for its members' narrow benefit. A sample line: NAI calls itself Norwegian, but it registers its planes in Ireland, hires its pilots in Singapore, and bases its flight crews in Thailand. Good, good, and good, I would say. Because anybody who's flown U.S. flights recently of the big three, it's the worst service in the world. The best thing that could possibly happen is competition. The GOP is in the midst of a branding crisis after its crushing defeat in 2012. Many articles have been written about efforts to rebrand the party as a force against crony capitalism and corporate welfare, and one for individual liberty and true free market capitalism. Washington Examiner's columnist Tim Carney's libertarian populism approximates the principles reformers such as Rand Paul seek to inject into the GOP. Unfortunately, the GOP has too many of what conservative guru Grover Norquist calls rat heads in a Coke bottle. Maybe that's a bit flamboyant, but Norquist's underlying point is that Republican politicians tarnish the whole party with their unprincipled action. It's a basic quality control issue. While Norquist is specifically referring to Republicans who vote for tax increases, I believe that the rat heads line of thought applies just as well here. Nearly 36 members of Congress going against their stated principles for the benefit of a union comprised mostly of pilots making six-figure salaries in order to prevent Americans' access to $150 flights to Europe. If Reince Priebus and John Boehner ever want to know why most Americans don't trust Republicans to do anything right, the case of NAI and ALPA is a shining example of brand mismanagement. Here's a list of the 33 House GOP members who signed on to the letter. Now, I wish I had that original article because it gave people who had purchased those flights and talking about the incredible customer service that they had. Yes, it was a Thai crew, and compared to the horrible customer service from the American employees. So, but you'll have to search around and find that for yourself. Now, I wanted to get over to these Eric Cantor stories and some other stories, but first I wanted to show you the debt to the penny. Now, we know that Cantor was intimately involved with suspension of the debt ceiling. So we don't even have a debt ceiling anymore. We just have an infinite amount of money that they can borrow and the Fed can print up. So Cantor, Boehner, Ryan, all these people, these Rhino Republicans, they don't stand for anything except they're big government on the right, there's big government on the left, and they all stand for big government. So you can see here, 16.738 trillion. That was the national debt 1 year ago, the 11th of June 2013. And we're talking about a national debt now of 17,555. So you can see $800+ billion. We're still on that pace. I like to track this going, date to date from a 1 year date to see how it's tracking, because they love to throw you off with their fake numbers, such as claiming that Clinton reduced the deficit, and you can prove that by simply pulling the number series. Prove that that's false just by pulling the number series yourself here, that the deficit, the debt itself has never gone down. It's never reversed. It's only gone up. The only question has been the rate of growth, the increase of the national debt. So let's look at some of these stories that I wanted to talk about. First, let's talk about Cantor's defeat here, because this is a big, big story. And of course, Fox News is coming in with all kinds of spin, and anybody who trusts Fox News is about as gullible as somebody who trusts CNN. But let's look at one of the summaries here. It's kind of interesting. So what the heck did happen? Eric Cantor has an impressive national organization, deep pockets, and has successfully helped shift the national GOP's thinking on a host of issues other than immigration. But if the folks at home are fed up with business as usual, look out. This race has already been overinterpreted, and that will only get worse. Veering and sneering. Cantor made several mistakes, ignoring the challenge, then turning bitterly negative in the closing weeks. It was a sour message compared to those sweetly successful incumbents like Lindsey Graham, which I really wish he would have been thrown out, of South Carolina, who emphasized the commonalities he shared with his rivals. Yeah, I bet. And asked for mercy on disagreements. Graham won easily last night as an avowed moderate in a very conservative state. Cantor wasn't a straight shooter. He attended a retreat for an anti-Tea Party group led by Representative Steve LaTourette this spring, and was clearly part of an effort to beat back the conservative insurgency. But as his own race appeared to grow more competitive, Cantor suddenly shifted. He deep-sixed immigration and vowed no action this year. But then after his pollsters erroneously declared him safe, Cantor flipped back the other way with approving words for legalizations for limited groups of illegal immigrants, veering and insincere sounding. Cantor wrongly believed that his clout, incumbency, and money would be enough. So there is a perfect example of the completely corrupt Rino politicians. Now, I hope that Boehner is next. I hope they toss him out. I hope they toss Ryan out. And I hope they toss every incumbent out, including all the Democrats. Doesn't matter even if it happens. So let's look at why it doesn't matter. It just simply doesn't matter. Let's look at this article first from Simon Black. And he's talking about the steps the government is taking to take as much money as they possibly can. Creativity isn't usually a word associated with government. Words like stodgy, bureaucratic, incompetent are typically more appropriate, but there is at least one area where bankrupt governments in particular tend to be exceptionally creative, and that's finding unique ways to steal people's money. And over the last few years, one of the most creative ways that a bankrupt government have come up with is to confiscate what they consider dormant bank accounts. This would be an account without any transactions over a specified period of time. The UK was the first on the scene with this idea with the 2008 Dormant Bank and Building Society Act. It was passed just in the nick of time, right as the entire financial system was collapsing. Within 2 years, the British Bankers Association estimated that the law could raise as much as $6 million for the government, no small sum in the UK. Earlier this year, Japan launched, you've seen a pattern here, the trilateral, bankrupt, corrupt governments of the world, Western collapsing governments. Earlier this year, Japan launched a similar initiative aimed at grabbing dormant bank accounts. They expect the move will raise approximately $500 million annually. Both, at least Japan and the UK, have long-term thresholds. In Japan, they'll seize an account if it's been dormant for more than 10 years. In the UK, it's 15 years. But there are a big number of things wrong with this approach. First, it calls into question the fundamental principle of private property. How can something be yours if the state can legislate its authority to seize it? And even if the account holder has long since passed, shouldn't the funds by default be awarded to the survivors nominated in accordance with the instructions of his or her last will and testament? And it goes on. So we know what's going on. Bankrupt governments are out to steal as much money as they possibly can. And here's the reason. Here's another reason. This is from David Stockman. This is his David Stockman's ContraCorner.com. So he's got a blog here. And this is about meet the disability judge who snoozes in court and always awards benefits, $2.5 billion so far. And I've covered this before, the growth of SSDI, the Social Security disability. What they've done, if you're not familiar with it, is that the Social Security fund was to be only used for people who had put money into it, and that was to pay their retirement. Then, of course, corrupt congressmen like Eric Cantor and all the rest passed bills so that people who had not contributed to the fund were able to take money out of the fund as long as they were disabled. And now we have courts declaring a large number of people disabled. You can see this chart is showing the growth in the billions of dollars. The $150 billion annual cost shown in the table is only for DI benefits per se. It does not include the whole range of associated benefits, such as Medicare, which DI recipients under 65 automatically receive. Now, remember, Medicare was for retired people. Now they're giving Medicare to people under 65. So again, same corruption. As well as Medicaid, food stamps, housing assistance, and other transfer programs. Altogether, DI currently generates an expense of easily $250 billion per year amongst 9 million beneficiaries. Needless to say, the DI program is plagued with huge structural flaws, and we'll see some of that. Let's look at the charts here. A shrinking labor pool, and you can see, sorry, I want to make that larger here. You can see that the labor force participation rate here is compared to the workers on disability in millions. So you can see that the number of workers, and by the way, the latest jobs number that the government released was absolutely ridiculous. If you remember, in the last couple of days, we had the government come out telling us, we've finally recovered all of the jobs that we lost during the recession. We've passed that mark. Of course, what they didn't tell you is that the population had increased by something like 14 million. So actually, we're talking about a massive loss of jobs for the growth of population. But we know that these government people are just a bunch of liars. So let's look at this award chart here. This is SSDI awards per 1,000 insured by diagnosis. Now, I've already talked about shrinks and quacks. We saw in the video that I did on the salaries of the state, salaries of psychiatrists and doctors were at the very top. Of course they were, because we have this corrupt medical system run by shrinks and quacks. And you can see here, look at this, mental and musculoskeletal. That's this line here. That's the increase. And you can see this is SSDI awards per 1,000. So since the year of about 1981, you can see we went from 0.75 to 3.5. So that is a 700% increase, a 7-fold increase in the number of people with mental, and you can bet that mental's about 90% of that number, and musculoskeletal. So either the American people are becoming much less healthy, or we have some gigantic scam being run by these shrinks and quacks, or probably something like both of those is going on at the same time. So you can read the rest of this. It's a report on this, and of course it's a gigantic scam. And I really discourage anybody, even if you are legitimate. And what's so sad, again, I have to repeat this because people accuse me of being cold-hearted. I'm not cold-hearted. I wish there weren't so many scammers in these programs so that the people who really need them could actually get the benefits, but that's not what's going to happen. And so when we're at this point in time when the system is about to collapse, then I have to encourage even the people who are in wheelchairs and disabled and need someone to take care of them to do the best they possibly can to find a way to work on the internet or find some skill or trade they can use, because when this system collapses, it's going to collapse for everybody, and that's going to be an absolute tragedy. And I think that's what's behind the DHS and all of the police state stuff that they're building. They're building an army, an internal army. And if you remember, Obama said that when he was first elected. He said that he needed to build an army internally that rivals the army that we have externally. So he obviously was given his marching orders from the very beginning. The powers that be can see an incredible catastrophe on the horizon, and for that reason they want to be prepared. Now, I certainly don't believe all of the false flag shootings that we have, but then again, I also do not support anybody who advocates violence. And as you know, all know, I'm a Christian, and my interpretation of the King James Bible is that that we are to obey the powers. I know that's going to make a lot of people angry. A lot of people are going to want to say, well, you should support the overthrow of the government. I don't support the overthrow of the government. It's my personal opinion that we're getting the government that we deserve. We're getting the leaders that we deserve. We basically told God to go away and leave us alone, and he's pretty much done that. So I in no way support people who advocate violent overthrow of the government. That's not something that I'm about. I wanted to make that clear. Nevertheless, many of these things are in fact conspiracies, and one of the biggest conspiracies that's out there, and you can see it right here, is the suppression of the silver price. We saw with palladium that they've let palladium go, probably market forces and this Russia-America thing. But you can see we're right on the cusp. I'm watching this very closely because we are on the cusp of a determination of where we're going to go from the May smackdown. And this has been a long haul. We've endured 3 years of a bear market, and it looks like it's ending. So it's going to be very interesting moving forward, and we'll talk to you next time.